from 24-Hour News 8. This is an ArtPrize Finale Week special. Why These Finalists? Live from the ArtPrize Hub in downtown Grand Rapids.
Well, the clock is ticking. We are just days away from handing out over $500,000 in cash at the ArtPrize Awards. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Sterling.
And I'm Susan Shaw. Welcome to Finale Week on Wood TV 8. We will have a live show for you every night at 7 o'clock, right on up to the ArtPrize Awards on Friday.
Tonight, the question is, why these finalists? Art experts from across the nation are in-house. We'll be asking voters and art professionals why there's agreement on some, but not others.
Over the next hour, we'll discuss the finalists for both the jurors and the public in the three-dimensional and time-based categories. Tomorrow night, live at 7 o'clock, we'll go through the two-dimensional and the installation categories.
So with that, let's welcome in our expert panel. We'll begin left to right. Scott Stuhlin, a curator at the Indianapolis Museum of Art.
Patty Johnson, founding editor of Art F City, of publications in New York City.
Miranda Lash, curator of contemporary arts at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville.
And moderating our discussion tonight will be Kevin Bice, director of exhibitions for ArtPrize.
Now, there is a lot of art to talk about. We hope to make it through all of the finalists tonight. We're going to start with a three-dimensional category, and here is who the jurors picked. House by Osman Khan. Tango Hombre by Maximo Gonzalez. From Afar, It's an Island by Alicia Wessler. Wall Wave Vibration by Loris Caccini. And Great Wall of Bees, Intelligence of the Beehive by Ladislav Hanka.
And here's who the public picked for 3D. Reciprocity by Mark Sijan. Poseidon's Paradise by Dan Heffron. Michigan in Motion by Dominic Pangborn. Engulfed in Glass by Jilly Barnes. And The Pond by Cruzy Crew.
The first entry we're going to focus on is Reciprocity. This is on the public vote list. It's on display at the Graham, and let's turn it over to Kevin Bice.
Thanks. Two quick programming notes. We're going to be jumping back and forth between the juried and public vote lists. We'll get to all of them that we can in the time that we have. And also, we're going to be looking at a couple of images from art history and popular culture for a little bit more context. So this work is a hyper-realistic, life-sized sculpture of two men, one on another one's back. I was immediately reminded of the work of Dwayne Hansen, a hyper-realist sculptor who made a lot of work in the 70s and 80s. Here's his piece, Tourists 2. And then also more recently, Ron Mook, Australian artist, who also does extremely realistic sculptures of the human body, often shifting scale. So back to Reciprocity by Mark Sijan. What did you guys think when you saw it today at Graham?
Right, so one of the criterion that critics and curators use for judging whether an artwork is good or worthwhile is, does it add something new or original to the conversation? And in the case of this piece, it's very close to its precedents, say, in Verist and photorealist sculpture. In the sense that it looks, one of the reasons it's attractive to people is it's deceptively real. And it's worth saying, this tendency that came out in the 70s of creating very realistic sculpture like Dwayne Hansen,
right,
even at that time, really frustrated critics because it ran counter to the other trends of the time, but it also delighted audiences. And
right,
it continues to do the same thing today, where these types of artworks are hugely popular because they look so convincing, but they frustrate critics because we're looking for something new to be added.
Right.
Sorry. I think it's worth noting, too, that Mark studied under Dwayne Hansen, so that's why his work looks a lot like his predecessors.
Right.
I think this particular work, it bothers me a little bit because I think it's a little pandering to what I would consider things that are already popular here. So it has a very personal narrative. I think this is, if I recall right, like this is a narrative that where he's carrying his father who is ill. There's an allegory to Jesus being getting tired and being carried. God carries him on the back, and this particular artist mostly works with nudes, and so this is actually kind of an atypical sculpture for him. So it really looks like something that was very sort of calculated to an audience here in a way that I think is maybe overly calculated.
Right.
It's not necessarily representative of his full practice.
Right. So we've got a lot to get through, so let's move on, and we'll start with you on the next one, Scott.
Okay, next up, an entry on the jurors list of finalists. From Afar, It Is an Island by Alicia Wessler. You can see this at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park.
So Scott, what was your take on this one? This is one of the jurors' picks.
I think this is a nice, kind of delightful surprise. I think there's an interesting taxonomy that the artist is setting up here. There's a lot of mystery in these pieces. I think there's a certain kind of preciousness to some of them, too. I kind of hesitate to use that word, but I think it's present in this work. But I think it's really nicely displayed in the gallery, too. It just has this kind of right feel in there. And what I like about this is that there's a lot of mystery there. So I think there's certain hints in it, but it really doesn't reveal itself completely for me.
Right.
And I think I'm really compelled by that to want to come back and...
I was reminded of the display cases at the Metropolitan Museum of Art or other history museums of like the really tiny, ancient artifacts.
I would be delighted if this piece were to win, actually, because it requires very close looking, it's quiet and subtle, and that would be an antithesis to the things that typically win ArtPrize.
That's true.
You know, something that requires a quiet moment and careful looking.
Yeah.
And there is a nice balance between representation and abstraction here. So there are things, small objects that look like things, and then there are objects that just resemble the material that they're made out of.
Right. There's also natural materials here, which even in this photo that we're seeing here, you can see that the windows behind those display cases look out into the Frederick Meyer Gardens, botanical gardens. I don't know if that's something that affected sort of the reading of the piece, to have it in like right next to that natural environment? Sure.
Well, I mean, it made it feel appropriately chosen. I wanted to mention the sculptors Carol Beauvais, who also uses natural and fabricated materials. You know, in this case, there's a nice push-pull between something that could have been found on the beach or something that could have been worked for hours, which again befuddles the ArtPrize expectation that a great piece has to have required thousands of hours.
Right.
You have no idea how many hours this took.
Yeah.
I like the scale too. That this is so intimate. You really have to spend. They're very, very delicate small pieces, and it's kind of the anti-ArtPrize of bigger, bigger, bigger.
Yeah.
And this takes a very different type of experience.
And there's more smallness with our next one.
Up next, another finalist from the jurors' side. This is Tenko Hombre by Maximo Gonzalez. This one's on display at Kendall College.
So this is like almost impossible to photograph, so it's good that we have a detail of it on the screen. Again, like what you were saying, almost the sort of antithesis of what we often see at ArtPrize. These are these tiny glass vials embedded in a wall with water and a grain of rice in each one.
Right. I would say with this piece, you know, overall I thought the showing at the Kendall School was very strong, but my one critique is the display. It's actually quite difficult to appreciate that the words Tango Hombre are written on the grain of rice. You have to get very close to it, and I think a lot of people miss that fact. And also there's a barrier that sort of prevents you from getting close. So for me, it was, you know, for such a powerful message, it might have been too quiet, maybe too subtle.
Well, and I think the artist says that that was sort of part of the point. He wanted it to be this very subtle message that could easily be overlooked. But I think this is sort of a good example of something that maybe it's difficult in this kind of an art exhibition to really work.
Right.
I actually, because we'd seen a lot of bees prior to that, those files looked like bees to me. But they look like a lot of other things other than what they are.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to know what you're looking at exactly. Somebody had to tell me there was rice inside those little crystals before I knew.
It doesn't reveal.
No, and I mean, I looked at it really close. I knew that I could read the text, but somehow I didn't see the rice.
Is that subtlety a weakness or a strength?
Well, I think something we should decide is whether it's best to create a good artwork overall, or whether it's best to have an artwork that fits ArtPrize. In which case, actually, the first artwork we looked at would be Wine, because he chose an appropriate fit for his audience.
Well, I don't know. I don't think you can say that like one artwork overall, like a good artwork one place may not be a good artwork another place. And I think we saw that with William Pohida, whose work I think is very well received in New York and is a critique of the New York art world, but brought to ArtPrize, it seems kind of nasty and like not, you know, appropriate. Like it just doesn't seem right. And we have the ArtPrize musical that we'll be talking about later that is a critique and is kind of brilliant for it. It's the William Powhida of ArtPrize.
Yeah, totally. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, this is on the public finalist side, and this is a piece that plays with your eyes. Michigan in Motion by Dominic Pangborn at DeVos Place.
Yeah, so this piece, in a two-dimensional image, it appears to be like perspective of an interior of a room. It protrudes from the wall so that as you move, the perspective seems to follow you. And there's other precedents for this. One, there's a famous tapestry at the Vatican by Raphael of Christ emerging from the tomb. And Raphael was able to do this in such a way that Christ's eyes seem to follow you as you move through the space. So that's a much earlier example of a similar effect. But more recently, there are other artists that have done pretty much the identical technique of sculpting this kind of pyramid to force perspective. A well-known example is Patrick Hughes, a British artist, and here we see those side by side. So this is a trick that has been done. Did Dominic Pangborn add anything to it in his ArtPrize outing?
I'm just going to put this out there. I think that work is a terrible piece. And I think that's because, once you know that it's a trick, it's basically done. And I think, with music, we expect, music to have a start and a finish. With art, we don't want to necessarily have an end to our viewing experience. And that's what happens when you work with, visual tricks. And there's nothing else there. We don't care about the paintings on the wall. We don't care about anything other than this, carnival trick.
It's a one-liner, and it's one of those things that works if you have never seen a piece like this before. Right. And then it's playing to that audience. I think it plays to that audience successfully because it does that one trick for it. But there again, it doesn't mean you want to come back to it again. So the illusion's gone then.
Right. Let's go to the next one.
We're going to discuss Wall-Way Vibration. This is by Loris Caccini. This is a finalist for the Jurors Award and is on display at Meyer Gardens.
So what did you guys got out to see this today? On closer inspection, what did you think?
I think this is a good example of how it's really good to go out and actually see the artwork in person. This photographs really well, and then actually seeing it in person, there's a lot of imperfections in the wall and some of the finish, and that makes the illusion not quite as effective as I think it would be otherwise. So I think this is another good example. You have to go out and actually see the work.
Any other thoughts about it? Diagrams, sound?
Well, it's funny. We actually compared this to another ArtPrize piece.
Right, that one's coming up next. We'll see that.
Yeah, which actually, it's interesting. They both strive for an effective rippling. And to me, it was interesting that one, the pond, had the public vote. This had the, the critics vote. We critics, we love subtlety. And so I have to say, when you're in the space, again, it almost errs on too much subtlety. It doesn't make a very strong impact in the gallery. And to your point about perfection, it really hinges on the perfection of the technique. And we've discussed where you can see the marks from the sanding, you can see the marks from the spackling.
I mean, this is a good example of something. If I were a jury member, I would not have chosen because I don't think that in the end it's very complicated, or even other works in this genre, we'll manipulate the wall more, or we'll see a greater amount of transformation. And so this seems like, I wouldn't call it the bare minimum, but there are better examples of better 3D work at ArtPrize.
Well, let's go to the next one then.
Well, we have the wood sculpture called The Pond, and that is a public vote finalist. This is the Cruzy Crew example. It's in the lobby of the Amway Grand.
Yeah, and then we have I think we have a slide actually comparing that to Wall-Way Vibration as well, as Miranda indicated. There we go. So let's talk about these two together a little bit. The pond. This is one that, in its presentation, gets at this ArtPrize trope that I know that we've all noticed, where there's a lot of sort of information about the number of raindrops that are suspended in the air and the number of hours and things like that.
It goes to the whole idea that quality is, time equals quality.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting seeing how many artists that are kind of using that strategy and also audience are asking that question. We were joking up here before that we should start doing that with our work, is keeping track of how many hours we've been to things too.
As a curator.
But I think it's kind of playing to an audience that kind of wants some of those things. But I think it really, and this is the one that kind of underlies all of this, is why people pick certain things.
Right.
And I think there's this certain kind of, we talk about the gee whiz realism, or the kind of like the wow factor of either craft or time, and then things that are representational. And I think that's kind of the underlying thing to a lot of the public vote, and this is an example of that.
Right.
I mean, I will say that the venue is well chosen. It kind of looks like hotel art, and it's in a hotel lobby, so those things are good.
Right.
But it also really reminds me, John Kessler is a very good sculptor, but like in New York, he has this sort of spot on his resume because he had this floating canoe that had water fall out of it and collect in this sort of well in the middle of planet Thailand, like a restaurant in Williamsburg that's now out of business. But this piece is like the wooden version of that. So there's a lot of sort of entertainment value to it, but I don't think that it goes very far in an art context.
Well, and to that end, I have to say, I really want to encourage the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. You have such an opportunity with that lobby. It's so much traffic. This really could be a platform for something provocative and amazing. And I really beseech this hotel to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, they have all those grand chandeliers, which are used at in Miami, the giant art fair that's like the second largest art fair to Art Basel at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There's already a precedent for cutting edge art in hotels, doing really interesting things.
Yeah. Well, and you've got to compete with a chandelier and a gold ceiling, as an artist, which is pretty tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I've also written complaints about that, so double-edged sword for sure.
There's this opportunity though with the hotel when you have people coming through that performative work can be there, so your whole hotel experience, the check-in experience could be a piece. I mean, there's different ways of thinking about how that experience works.
I would just like to say that I would not like my check-in experience to be a performance piece.
We'll talk about that later.
Let's go to the next one.
Our next piece comes from the jurors finalists for the 3D category, Great Wall of Bees, Intelligence of the Beehive by Ladislav Hanka. This is at UICA.
All right, so for this piece, there are prints and also some objects that are in a glass case in the wall. There's a whole colony of living honeybees in there doing their thing, producing honey, producing honeycomb. This isn't the only artist to use live bees as a kind of a collaborator in the work. Aganitha Dick is another one who takes these sort of porcelain figurines and allows bees to sort of cover them and alter those objects. But this is on display with the bees, buzzing around and doing their thing. What did you guys think about the experience of seeing it?
Well, I found it, I found it delightful to examine the bees, learn about bees. We learned quite a bit about, bee biology. As a conceptual fit, on the one hand, it's good because ArtPrize is about the power of the many, right? To some extent, the power of the community to make a decision. That said, when we looked at the prints and the actual content of the artworks, it could have been anything. It almost seemed irrelevant what the subject of the artwork was that the bees were eating. And in the end, I felt like it was much more effective as, an educational piece on bees and thinking about bees than, a powerful artwork.
Any other thoughts? Are people there, when you were there, are people looking at bees, or are they looking at the art, or are they looking at the gestalt of all of it?
I was looking at the dead bees. There's tons of dead bees, and it's just like a trough of dead bees. And I mean, so of course you care about the drawings and things like that, but there are other elements that that may dominate.
Right.
Yeah, I would say the same. We learned a lot about bees, and it was just really fascinating and very engaging kind of watching them, but I wish that the content of some of the prints would have related a little bit more to that. It's almost seemed very kind of incidental.
Because the prints are like they're animals, mostly other than bees. Right. Let's go to the next one.
Next is House by Osman Khan. This is a finalist on the jurors' side, and it is located at Meyer Gardens.
So a lot of artists have used fluorescent lights to create artwork. Dan Flavin, of course, is a really popular one. I put an image in here of Robert Irwin, and this is in the lobby of your museum, Scott, the Indianapolis Museum of Art. Just as sort of a reference point of another use of that material. Obviously, this is quite a bit different than making a structure out of fluorescent lights. So if we can go back to the image of the house. What did you guys think? It's not just fluorescent lights, I should add. There's furniture, there's video monitors.
Well, I think this is actually a very good example of a piece that would have benefited from better wall text. So this particular piece is supposed to be about the mortgage crisis, and this is like a house made of glass or lights that flicker. And you see that in the image that we've all seen that's reproduced, you see all the lights on, but sometimes the lights don't work, and there's some CRT screens in the middle. I'm not really sure what that refers to, maybe the market or something, but it refers to the mortgage crisis. The wall text says that Khan is interested in presenting artifacts for social criticism. So, like, I think that's, well, it's not incorrect, it's really imprecise, and that particular reading, like, I would have appreciated that in the gallery.
Right.
And I don't think that it's necessarily evident through the materials alone, but sometimes pieces do need auxiliary information.
Sure.
At the same time, I do want to applaud the institutions of Grand Rapids for participating the way they have in ArtPrize. I think it's great that there are curated shows, and the subjects generally are, I think, appropriate and creative. The Kendall School doing a show about collaboration, and I'm sorry,
that was money. Yeah,
the
UICA
money,
about collaboration.
UICA doing another one about collaboration, another one being about money. This one being about emerging sculptors. I think the subjects of the shows are very appropriate, and I'm very glad that the institutions are taking a more, increasingly active role in ArtPrize.
And these are all artists that in this particular show, I wasn't aware of any of them. So that's great.
And also seeing, I can't tell you how cool it is to see lines of people around the block getting into a museum, and it's raining outside, and that is so exciting. I can tell you, for like a curator to come and see people engaged in that.
Let's go to the next one and make sure we can get through some of these.
Okay, the next one is Engulfed in Glass by Jilly Barnes. This entry is a public finalist, and you can see it at the Ford Presidential Museum.
All right, so this one is at the Ford Museum. The Ford Museum also housed the winner of the public vote last year, which for those of us here in the live studio audience is right there. But for those of you on television, there's kind of a side-by-side comparison. We've got sunsets made up of many little parts. Obviously glass and fabric being different materials, but something similar going on here. Engulfed in Glass, was it working? What was the experience going to see it?
No, it wasn't working. It's a bad piece. It's a sunset, which is so ubiquitous. We see sunsets all the time. And the woman, Jilly Barnes, was right beside the piece, giving the spiel the whole time.
Right.
And the main thing that I took from this was that if one piece had not made it, the whole piece would have been ruined. So she had to pack it really carefully. Like, that's the whole story behind the piece, that it had to be packed carefully. That's not extra content.
Okay, so a question about like this piece, but also more generally about ArtPrize. What is that, like, the artist pitch? What does that do as a viewer for you?
It is so incredibly distracting at times, and I think it's such a tricky thing to do, and for the most part, as much as people think it's helping, it's actually totally taking away, and you are part of the piece when you're doing that. It's impossible to separate it.
Right.
And we saw that happening at the Graham the other day, and we were going through there as well, and like, well-meaning, but things that become part of the piece and really start to, it's hard not to view it as being the sales pitch going on, and that's done in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move on to the next category.
Actually, I think we're going to have to take a break right now, but our conversation certainly will continue.
That's right. Coming up, our experts will weigh in on the time-based category when we come back. And welcome back to the ArtPrize Hub for our special Why These Finalists, as we examine the finalists for both the juror and public awards.
We want you to know that you can keep voting for your favorite finalists on the public side until Thursday night at 11:59. And then on Friday, the winners will be announced during the ArtPrize Awards. Our live coverage begins at 7 o'clock on Wood TV 8. And you can also come party with us in Rosa Parks Circle. There will be music, food, beer, and we'll show the award show right on the big screen right there, and that party starts at 5 o'clock.
Our next entry are time-based entries. These are categories. This is a category that the art changes over time and duration. Think performances, film, or an entry to interact with.
Here are the jurors' finalists on this one. Respirador, or Breather, by Dance in the Annex. Capitalism Works for Me by Steve Lambert. Operation Pay Dirt by Mel Chin. Life Copy by Jason File. And ArtPrize the Musical by Corey Ruffin.
And now for the public finalists unveiled yesterday. They are Urban Tumbleweed by Nathan LaRoe, Always Nowhere by Liz Roberts, Your Move by Robert Shangle, Paralux by New D Media, Color Out of the Darkness by Carol Rhoda.
The first entry that we'll discuss in the time-based category is Capitalism Works for Me by Steve Lambert. This is on the jurors' shortlist and on display at Kendall College. So let's toss things back over to ArtPrize Exhibitions Director Kevin Weiss.
Thanks. All right, so this work is interactive. It's a giant lit-up sign, as we can see, and it has a sort of yes and no, or true and false voting buttons, as well as a video component. Just by way of comparison, I found an image of when this work was previously installed temporarily in the middle of Times Square, which is a very different context, I think, than a dark, well-appointed art gallery here at Kendall. So I just wanted to kind of kick off the conversation that way. How did you read the work? How does it change if it's indoors, if it's in sort of a center of capitalism or a center of education?
Well, I would say if I'm allowed to publicize my vote, I would vote for this piece. Actually, I liked it for a number of reasons. One being that it talks about voting, that people actually vote, and so in the literal sense there's that fit with ArtPrize. But also I think about how the premise of ArtPrize is money attracting artists to participate. So I feel like one of the subtexts of this piece is, does capitalism work for art? Is it an effective model for attracting good art? And can good art come out of it combined with that democratic element? So I thought it was a perfect fit for this platform, and I would vote for this.
What about you guys?
I thought it's a really strong piece. I think one component with this too is having the video, contextualizing it in Times Square, and then having those really thoughtful responses.
Right, and in the video, just because we don't have an example of it here, it's people after they voted saying how they voted and why.
Right, and it was interesting watching people interact with it, particularly on Saturday when it was really busy in there. Is a lot of people like pausing and kind of like this, kind of wondering what the right decision is that they're supposed to be making.
Do you think that there's a self-consciousness in terms of like who you're with, who's watching you, and like if there's an answer that's cooler than another answer?
Oh, absolutely.
No, yeah, I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah. Although ironically, we learned you had to press quite hard for your vote to be registered. You can't, we
you have to want it.
You
really
can't be timid about it.
Yeah.
You have to very decisively, punch it down. And so, yeah, you are putting your opinions on display, which is normally something secret.
Right.
I think the interesting thing about the videos that were on display that were shot in Times Square about a year ago is it seems clear that those were shot around the time of the government shutdown, because most of the time the conversation seemed to center around capitalism as it pertained to, do I have health care? Do my friends have health care? Does everybody have health care? And, there was at least one person who specifically referenced how Republicans were trying to take that away. But generally speaking, like when people said whether it worked for them or not, it was a very personal experience. Either you know, somebody they knew or, you know, a relative had been screwed by the system, or they hadn't, but they acknowledged that it was imperfect. And I like that imperfectness was presented within a piece that presents you with a false dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, I think we got to move to the next one just so we can keep it going.
Okay, Kevin, next is a dance performance inside Sight Lab called Respirador Breather. It's a finalist for the Jurors Award.
So there's sort of two elements to this piece. There are video projections in the space that depict dancers kind of interacting with this building, and the building obviously has a lot of character, and it's an old hotel. And then periodically throughout ArtPrize there have been these dance performances, and sometimes those performances interact with the audience, or they pull audience members into it. So just as kind of a point of comparison, an image here from a performance by Tino Segal at the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern, where he's asked, it's not really dance as much as it's just these sort of people who hang around this empty gallery, and if you go in there as a viewer, you're suddenly like made a part of it and interacted with. He also had quite a well-known piece at the Guggenheim, which had a similar kind of thing where viewers were drawn into it, and that's sort of an uncomfortable and maybe personal experience. I don't know if you guys got to see the dance, because it only happens periodically, but any reactions to the video or to the piece overall?
So we didn't get to see the dance, which is a little unfortunate, but I was told that the video was supposed to sort of support itself or exist on its own as its own work. I'm going to get like a tiny bit nerdy here just quickly. My first impression when I saw this piece was that it reminded me of somebody who was aware of the downtown New York dance scene and was probably influenced by it. And what I mean by that is that there was a lot of dancing that was improvisational by nature, not particularly concerned with form or craft. It was sort of sloppy and happy for it, which is fine, but not necessarily for this particular piece. And I didn't like any of those qualities, because what happened was that you looked at a 3 to 4 women twirling and sometimes running up against a wall, but doing very little to tell you anything about how bodies relate to architecture or that specific space. So in a way, it was, you know, it both wasn't rigorous enough for me, but it also didn't tell me anything new.
I think let's go to the next one.
Okay, up next is another finalist from the public vote. This is Nathan LaRoe's Urban Tumbleweed, which is at Cathedral Square.
So this one is a video and a sculpture. So this sculpture sits on a low pedestal, and then behind it there's a video projection of the sculpture sort of being performed in a way. It can roll down hills, and it creates an interesting sound while it does it. What were your thoughts about encountering this one in the space?
This is one of those really fun gems that you kind of find and stumble on. I think this is one that we weren't quite sure what to expect, but the video is really, really delightful. And I think it's playful, it has a personality to it, and this is one we also talked about how, for the context of maybe in a gallery, we don't just have the video, but for the context of ArtPrize, having the sculpture with the video was the right strategy for it.
Right.
I think it's probably my favorite piece that I've seen at ArtPrize ever. I think there's so much personality to that particular object. We watch it roll down hills, we watch it roll down through the park. We're afraid when it goes too fast because we think it might injure itself. And even the way that it's shot, there's like a real variety of these like really short close-up shots. We see like a guy running after it as if like the thing has gotten away, and like, you know, there's these like super long shots where you just watch it roll forever. So even from a filmmaking standpoint, I think this movie is just a really great work.
Any other thoughts, Brandon?
Well, you know, I thought it was kind of a commentary on, you know, say the problem of vacated downtowns. I mean, tumbleweeds imply desolation, a lack of people, and so the fact that it was running through the city to me almost read a bit post-apocalyptic. Like the city's been gone, there's no one left to inhabit it, just the tumbleweeds rolling by.
Let's go to the next one.
Another finalist from the public vote is Color Out of the Darkness. You can see Carol Rhoda's entry on the lawn of the Ford Presidential Museum.
So this is a sculpture that's outdoors. It's on the time-based list because it has a music element to it. What were your thoughts when you went to see it today?
Well, they were uniform, I would say, in that we didn't like it.
I will say most pieces we don't like have some sort of redeeming thing or something to grasp onto. This one, I don't think we found anything.
No. It's terrible. You know, it's horrible. It's really bad.
And it's out of category.
The artist should be ashamed for calling it time-based. There's really, I mean, time-based really implies there's something revealed by looking or experiencing it over time. There was a musical component, which, by the way, was not functioning when we were there. But the music, from my understanding, did not have an arc to it. There was no really rewarding factor for listening to the music over time. I mean, to me, it seemed like a manipulation of the category. Which, again, if you want to talk about is it a game to win ArtPrize, this artist is playing that, and that's good. And I know
but in the most confused way possible. Like, it's also like there's flowers on the piece, like in coffee shops, like aesthetic, next to like God quotes about how like they're like very, you know, what a wretch am I kind of quotes. And then on the back end, there's like a quote about how Robin Williams made us all laugh, as if Robin Williams had made the quote. It's a quote by Billy Crystal. It's like misattribution of quotes in your own piece. Like, I just like don't understand how so many mistakes could be made in one shot. That actually is the impressive thing about this particular piece.
Well, let's move on to the next one.
Another entry from the public vote finalists. This is Parallax on display at the UICA.
So this piece is kind of an immersive environment. It's a darkened room with these kind of, you know, sculptural elements, and then there's projection mapped kind of graphics that are like, you know, sort of flashing and swirling all around it as you sit in the space. Scott, as we looked at this and discussed it, Scott was reminded of some of the staging of Daft Punk. And we have an image of that, particularly their Alive tour in 2007, where they had this big pyramid, similar kind of like angular build out with projection mapping, of course, on it. I also thought a little bit of Tron and other things like that. And of course, you know, projection mapping it's one of those really visually arresting kind of new technologies. And artists are always drawn to new technologies like a moth to the flame. So did this one work? What do we think?
I think it's something where the technology is always this little bit of this trap. You kind of, again, run into that kind of gee whiz thing, because the technology the piece that this can be done, or is it actually the content that's in the piece that's driving it? And I feel like this one, or there's some element, but it really is people kind of that are wowed by this projection mapping technology, and I feel like there could have been more done with that, or kind of reveal something new that doesn't feel like it's been in dance culture for a decade.
I mean, I think one of the problems with this particular piece is that it really falls into the trap of techno-fetishism. So what you see is like a statement that tells you about how you need to, like, it would be good to break out of our creative boxes, and then like you watch the walls like sort of break apart as if like glass is breaking, and so it's all kind of broken down for you, and you see like dolphins explode in the water. You see like a volcanic type action. You see the wind. You see earth, wind, fire, and water. And I'm not even convinced that the artists were aware that they were using all four elements. Like, it seemed much more about building a techno cave.
Right. Let's go to the next one.
All right, the next one, let's discuss ArtPrize, the musical by Corey Ruffin at Pyramid Scheme. The musical is a finalist for the Jurors Prize.
Miranda, what did you think about ArtPrize the musical?
I loved it. I thought it was hysterical. And actually, I have to say, I think it's a sign of healthy discussion. I mean, the fact that this could be selected, that a lot of people saw it, it's a critique of the system, but that's a good thing. You know, it was pretty ruthless. I mean, it did not hesitate from depicting people in a negative light, particularly the founder of ArtPrize and the local artists. But I also thought the complaints voiced in it are also universal to so many cities. I mean, whenever a big endeavor comes to a city, there's always complaints from the local artist community. Why isn't this more about me? And so the fact that this could be sort of generalized and you know, laughed about, I thought was a really good thing.
I thought it actually translated really well, even not knowing all the inside references, and I know we're missing a lot of those, which we were informed later. Like some of these are real people, which was nice to know. I also think with it too is that it's it's really well written and the music's really catchy. Mm-hmm. We were informed we couldn't sing or say any of it because we're on network TV, but it's very catchy. Yes.
Look, I have to say, I mean, something that's a bit biting about the musical that it talks about is like, you know, you put the choice in the hands of the public, and, you know, a public, you know, and there's even this funny quote that's like, you know, before ArtPrize, the people of Grand Rapids had a 3rd grade education about art. Now, thanks to ArtPrize, they have a 5th grade education about art. You know, and there's even a song about how they choose artwork that is a piece of the S word.
Right.
And, you know, but again, Grand Rapids, this is your opportunity to sort of, you know, change the message, flip the conversation and say, no, we can choose great works of art. We can really think about this. You know, there's no reason it has to go on this track. And then, you know, and then you can laugh at the fact that ArtPrize once made fun of you for selecting, you know, Stained Glass Jesus.
Any other thoughts on that one before we go on?
I think this one's really interesting too, is actually like critiquing ArtPrize within ArtPrize. And even at the end of the video is incorporating their number into it and like the voting, like this thing where it's kind of tongue-in-cheek but also playing the game along with it. And I love that kind of like inside out of it and kind of somewhat like, I think it's a kind of a really fascinating conceptual piece. And this is one I wonder if they even would want to win or not.
Let's talk about the next one.
Okay, back to the jurors' time-based finalists now. This is Operation Pay Dirt, $100 bill project by Mel Chin at Kendall College.
So this is an interactive piece where people are invited to kind of color and draw their own $100 bills, which are called $100 bills. And those are being collected actually all over the country to make sort of a symbolic exchange of value and ask for more attention and more funding for lead remediation, especially in poverty-stricken areas and cities all over the country. So it's really kind of an activist art project. I do want to, there's sort of 2 notes here that are interesting. Mel Chin was a juror last year, so that's a first that we had a juror who went on to enter. Also, Miranda curated a retrospective of Mel Chin's work, which included this work at the New Orleans Museum of Art, which is now in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, no, it's now in St. Louis.
St. Louis, I'm sorry.
But yeah, actually, it's really interesting to see it in this context. Again, it's about the idea of the vote, and so each drawing is, in a sense, a vote to address the problem of lead remediation. One of the reasons they encourage children to make the drawings is because children are the ones most affected by lead remediation. And one of the reasons it's a drawing and not just your name or a signature is because one of the attributes that lead remediation affects the most is brain development and people's capacity to think creatively. And so a drawing is a creative act. And so the product is this amalgamation of creative acts, which is one of the beauties and activist sides of the piece.
Yeah.
So I was very pleased to see here, not just because I love Mel Chin, but because I thought, again, that participatory element, the idea of multiplicity, I thought was a great fit for ArtPrize.
So this, you know, we don't have nearly enough time to get to the bottom of this, but just there's kind of this debate that happens within the art world with this type of project, which is often called social practice or activist art, where the artwork itself has like a very specific and motivated political action and is trying to get like real world results. Like, what do you guys think about, any thoughts on that movement in general, or like how this piece is a part of that?
It's a big question.
It is a big question. And you have 30 seconds. Can you just like,
this isn't the format.
No, but the fact that, I mean, so social practice is undoubtedly a growing trend in contemporary art and something that people are increasingly acknowledging, and the fact that it can now play a role in ArtPrize. And social practice, by the way, is notoriously difficult to display,
right?
Because it involves artwork in the community, and this is, a temporary installation. So the fact that it can now, be embraced, I think I take as a positive sign.
That's great.
Well, I mean, and also I think it has to be said that this particular display was very good. I mean, it was right beside the sort of crystal pieces that looked like tacks. And this piece, like, it was really nice to see so many people actually making out the dollars and thinking about it and engaging. Because, I mean, I think the thing to remember about participatory art is you always have a choice. You didn't have to sit down. I didn't. I kind of wish I had, but like, and there were a lot of people who did.
That's great. Let's go on to the next one.
Up next, Liz Roberts, Always Nowhere. This is on display at the Graham. This car is a public vote finalist.
Yeah, so this is a car, a whole car, and then it has videos projected from reverse onto the windshield. When I saw this piece, I was immediately reminded of something, and I think that you guys saw it too. In the 2010 Whitney Biennial, the Bruce High Quality Foundation, which is an artist collaborative, did a piece called We Like America and America Likes Us, which employs the same technique. Very different works, but similar in sort of the window projection world. How do we think about Liz Roberts' piece? Did it succeed? What did it add to that kind of trope?
I thought this piece was fairly mundane and boring. And I really think part of this is the thing we haven't talked about is where things are placed and how that impacts some of the vote. So getting into the core question about why these finalists and why certain things may elicit votes. This is in a very high traffic spot where people are waiting to get into
the intersections.
Into the intersections piece. So just, implying some things, but is that some reason why some things are getting more votes because of their placement?
That's interesting.
Well, we even talked about the choice of the car. I mean, it should be noted that in Bruce High Quality Foundation, they choose the car that was used in the Ghostbusters movies, so it had this very specific, memory and connotation, whereas this car seemed generic. It seemed like a stand-in, just a device. I mean, I think our feelings were generally pretty lukewarm. The technique is somewhat interesting, but the narrative could have been stronger.
Great.
Well, and the narrative was like a sort of very personal narrative about how she had been in a car accident herself and and now drove very carefully. But then what you see is a lot of generic landscapes, so the actual trip is not that fun.
Right. Brian, Sue?
All right, the discussion, we'll take a time out for a second. We do want to remind you to join us tomorrow. We're going to be going in depth on the two-dimensional and the installation categories. That is tomorrow night at 7 o'clock right here on Wood TV 8.
And we are not done yet tonight. Right after this break, we'll talk to our experts about their thoughts on Grand Rapids and ArtPrize 2014. And welcome back to Why These Finalists. We only have a few more minutes, but I want to go right down the line with our experts and get your opinion on how you think ArtPrize 2014 is compared to, say, years past, if you've seen them or for the first time.
It's exciting to see it grow. This is my second year here, and I think it's exciting to see it grow, and I think the quality of the artists coming I think since last year. I think it was interesting to see, more well-known artists like Mel Chin, who went from being a panelist and a juror to being an artist here, and I think that's a good sign.
I too think it's grown quite a bit. I was here 3 years ago, so there's been a bit of time between when I first was here and when I came here again. I think there's a lot fewer kind of, for lack of a better word, like dog and pony shows. So there's less really strong sales pitches from particular artists, although they still exist and affect the way the work is read. It seems to be a little bit better on that front.
I would say, it's been a very thought-provoking and powerful experience for me. The bottom line is museums across the country are struggling with the fact that they are losing their audiences, and they are having to acknowledge that if they do not engage them more and have more participation from them, they won't be able to continue. And so to see what that looks like on a very radical scale is very powerful. And also, as museums, we're always looking for that sweet spot, something that we feel is intellectually rigorous, that still captures the imagination of the public. And the fact that there is one artwork, an artwork, Intersections by Anila Quayum Agai, I hope that said that right, that is on both lists honestly gave me hope that that sweet spot is achievable. That you can, that museums can present artwork that the public will love just as much.
And that installation is at the Graham. It is lovely.
Scott, Patty, Miranda, thank you so much tonight. Kevin, thank you as well. We want you to invite you to stay tuned with Wood TV 8 through finale week. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, we'll discuss the finalists in the 2D and the installation categories. Wednesday and Thursday, we'll have the ArtPrize Finale Week Special, and that features the Talsma Concert Series. Those will be live at Rosa Parks Circle, and it all wraps up Friday night with the ArtPrize Awards.
Make sure and stay with us. Up next on Wood TV is The Voice. Make sure and join us for tomorrow's Part 2 here at the ArtPrize Studios. 24-hour News 8 at 11. We'll have much more, too. Make sure and stay with us. Have a good night.